Welcome back to the channel. A friend of mine just sent me a link to an article that's out now in the Mercury News about vaccination rates by race among teens. I'm going to put the screenshot to it right here on the screen. What does this have to do with anything? Well, it looks like a number of data points are converging and showing that there is a disparity in the rate of vaccination among teens between blacks, between whites, and Asians. It looks like blacks have the lowest rate of vaccination, whites are next, and Asians have the highest rate of vaccination. What does this have to do with anything? It has to do with schools. Many schools around this state are mandating different thresholds of vaccination to go in-person school. In-person school, of course, is an incalculable good for students. It is one of the greatest things we have in this country, in-person public school. Now, the California state level has a rule in place that as the vaccines receive full FDA approval, at the start of, I think, the next cycle, you will have to have done it to enroll in school. But a number of local places are instituting even stricter policies, saying that even when the vaccine exists solely under the auspices of the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, you will have it to come to school. And I have written an op-ed about this in U.S. News & World Report about Los Angeles. I'm going to put a link to that down below as well. This article shows that I believe the percentages were, I'm going to put it right on the screen, but I think the percentages were 62% for black teens in the Bay Area, 80-some percentage for whites, and 95% for Asians. This is a real disparity. This is going to translate, unless something is done differently in the next few weeks, into a huge difference in in-person education. Many people have been talking for years about structural racism. This type of policy is in fact the structural racism people are talking about. In-person school is one of the few ladders of upward mobility left in this society. This is a society that has done everything possible since the end of World War II to strip down, to cut, to break, to topple every upward ladder of opportunity. The last tattered rope ladder left is in-person public education. It's not remote public education. You don't need to look far to find dozens and dozens of studies showing huge educational losses when classes move remote. It's not the same thing. Anyone who knows anything knows it's not the same. Just as going to a sporting event in person is not the same. It's different, it's better than watching it on TV. Similarly, being in an auditorium, being in a classroom is much more enriching than Zoom. And at some ages and with some students, Zoom school is a total farce. So, what do you have here? You have policies being imposed for the large part by people who claim to want to do better on these issues in terms of educating the youth, particularly underrepresented minorities and particularly people who may be socioeconomically disadvantaged. These policies, these vaccine mandates may do the precise opposite unless we do something about them in the very near term. Now, of course, one may talk about efforts and outreach and education to try to move people along the spectrum in terms of their beliefs about vaccination. Sure, that's possible. But even if you've done that, you may still have huge disparities. You're going to have to deal with that. If it were up to me, I would suggest you give up this idea of vaccine mandates in schools for kids. I think that's not the place you want to put the pressure on. If you were to put the pressure, the place to put the pressure is on the 70-year-olds, the 80-year-olds, the 60-year-olds who are unvaccinated. It's on adults. Look at the age gradient of this virus. If you're going to put the pressure somewhere, it's got to be on the oldest people because they're the ones who are going to benefit the most from this. Kids, many people make arguments that quarantining policies are very disruptive, prolonged masking is very disruptive. I'm sympathetic to those arguments, but I'm not sure this mandate is going to solve all those problems. If you continue to swab people who are asymptomatic repeatedly, you will find SARS-CoV-2 in the future. The policy failure is the quarantining problem, is the quarantining policy. That's the failure. If you want to resolve this, I would suggest you conduct some randomized controlled trials as they attempted and did one small study in Europe, in the United Kingdom, where you randomize people to who test positive to quarantine the class or to do test. And if you test twice negative, you can go back to class and different strategies like that. We have no proof that the quarantining actually slows the spread of the virus in a meaningful way. And by slows the spread of the virus, of course, the endpoints I'm most interested in is how many kids end up really sick, who feel really bad, how many teachers feel really sick. That's the endpoint we want to avert. We cannot live in a world where the endpoint we're trying to avert is PCR positivity, is antigen positivity. That's not the endpoint we're trying to avert. We're trying to avert people actually getting sick with SARS-CoV-2. So design and conduct these studies to test different quarantine policies to see if it does that. Don't be surprised if many of these strategies are incredibly punitive to students and don't actually achieve that outcome. What else would I say here? I think this has been misguided since the beginning. There's another set of reasons why these vaccine mandates are misguided. They are so inflexible. Nobody on earth could possibly think that the vaccine dose and schedule is 100% optimized. In fact, go back and play the audio from the vaccine advisory committees, and they will concede that it is not yet optimized. That's a point that many commenters, panelists have made. What does it mean to be optimized? Optimized means the absolute dose that has the most favorable benefit by mitigating the harms of things like myocarditis. It is possible that changing the duration between the doses may help. It is possible that there's some tweaking to be done with the exact nanogram dose of the mRNA construct that could be done in the future. We may learn something in the future. My point is just these mandates are so inflexible, as I pointed out in my U.S. News and World Report op-ed, link below, that you cannot space the timing out of this too far, or you will risk being pushed out of school. The mandate is so inflexible. Not only do you have to get 2 doses, you got to get them within a certain period of time and have an extra few days before the mandate falls. That is really bizarre policymaking. That means that, if you were to go to a place like Norway, maybe all of the kids would be thrown out of school because they have decided to do 1 dose or stretch the interval out between the doses. These are strategies that many parents may want to discuss with a pediatrician that are being prohibited by the mandate itself. This is a troubled time in this country. There are lots of divergent views on vaccination, and I don't approve of either poll. I don't approve of the poll that you need to, under strict draconian penalties, mandate everyone to do everything, and I don't approve of the poll that makes up things that are not true about vaccines in an effort to scare people away. Those are both irrational polls. We need to strive for some common ground, some middle ground where we can say, I've looked through the FDA models. On balance, most of those models are favorable. There are still some open questions. We can encourage parents to discuss with their pediatrician, particularly as we move now to 5 to 11, what they want to do. 1 dose now, and maybe wait a little bit, perhaps wait a little bit for the first dose, as I wrote in an op-ed in U.S. News and World Report. Not U.S. News, that was USA Today. USA Today, I'll put that link below. An op-ed about how it's okay to wait right now for 5 to 11. These are different ways you can handle it. And the policy has to allow for some flexibility. It can't be so entrenched and intractable. Also, there has to be something to be said for the fact that the policies are so heavily tied to the political affiliation of the area. If it's heavily left-leaning, they're going to mandate 2 doses in a 12-year-old boy, and you got to get them within a certain period of time, otherwise you're thrown out of school. And if it's right of center, we're not going to mandate anything at all, not even for teachers. There has to be some way that this is not a political discussion. It's a discussion about risk and benefits, what's reasonable in positions and what's unreasonable. So this Mercury Times report that I'm going to link to below, it is really important. It's really important because the potential upper bound benefit of the policy, in other words, moving from whatever the vaccination rate in California and whatever these counties is to a little bit higher by doing this, that's a potential benefit in this age group. And you'll have to weigh that on one side of the scale. The potential downside on the other side of the scale is there are going to be some kids thrown out of school. This is suggesting that that's not going to happen equally to all races of kids. It's going to disproportionately hurt black kids. That is, in fact, structural racism. That is a big problem. And that harm has to be weighed. And that might be a huge harm because there are many papers you can try to learn from about school closure. There has never been, to my knowledge, a school closure this long in any nation, this deep and this long. There is no precedent for this. You do not know, I think, what this means. And certainly, if you look at other nations and other periods of time, those are very different periods of time than this period of time with this few rope ladders of upward mobility left. What does school closure mean in this circumstance, in this political climate, in this moment? We have no idea. I suspect it's going to be calamitous. These policies may be well-intentioned, but the people who are doing them have to use your noggin. You can't simply be a tribal creature here. You have to think through the implications of the policy. They may not always cut the way you want. I don't know what to say. I have, unfortunately for myself, taken an interest in these issues because they are huge issues. And my day job, which I will return to someday, the stakes of that are big. They're enormous from a public health and public policy standpoint. But the stakes of the school issue is like 10 or 100 times bigger than those issues. So I will regret it forever if I don't point these out in this moment. So below are links to several op-eds, a link to this news article. This is what you get on this channel. You're going to get policy analysis. You're going to get cancer policy often. You're going to get lectures at times. If you like that, if that's what you're in the mood for, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message, follow this channel, push that little bell or whatever they call it so you get notifications. Until next time.